evening. We don't have anyone to introduce us, so I've been asked to kick off by saying, firstly, that isn't this wonderful that we're all here just to subvert the notion that nothing good can come out of the public sector? No.
Well, the fact that I'm here barely actually has a relationship to that comment. I came from Boston. My wife and I came from Boston. Took 7 hours. In any society that hasn't been smashed by neoliberal policies of the kind you describe, it would have taken maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. There is a train, the pride of the public sector, which I took for the first time in 1950, and it's about 15 minutes faster now than it was then when it makes the schedule, which is a chancy situation. So we decided to come by airplane and spent most of the afternoon on the runway.
Well, Noam, what shall we talk about?
Well, we can talk about the neoliberal assault on the world's population in the last generation, which you've written so brilliantly about.
What strikes me, given the last quite eventful year of my life, what really strikes me is the major disconnect between the philosophy and ideology of neoliberalism and that which I encountered when negotiating, in inverted commas negotiating, when being dictated by the great and the good of the neoliberal international financial establishment. Now, think about it. If you take the great libertarians, the great neoliberals, who castigate all tax-funded activities, and you consider the reason why I'm here today and I'm not still the Minister of Finance of Greece. Why? It's because I refuse another 100 billion dollars of a tax-backed loan to my insolvent government, which the creditors insisted that I should take.
The three nines.
It's astonishing. So here it is. So here you have the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, and the European Commission insisting that our bankrupt state takes on another 100 billion under conditions that guarantee that we will not be able to repay the taxpayers of Europe that will be granting us that money. And that comes from neoliberals, who supposedly are against all tax-funded loans to government, and who supposedly believe that an insolvent entity doesn't have the moral right to take on more loans.
But as you point out, 90% of those loans go to French and German bankers.
That was the first loan. This loan, it would go from the one pocket of the creditors to another pocket of the creditors, so that they would maintain the pretense that Greece was not bankrupt. But effectively, what I'm trying to say is the intense hypocrisy of the neoliberal establishment, which is not really even interested in sticking to its own neoliberal ideology. This is just 19th century power politics of crushing anyone who dares stand up to them and say a simple word, no.
But I think that's actually traditional. One of the paradoxes of neoliberalism is that it's not new and it's not liberal.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
If you look at what you describe is a form of hypocrisy, but the same is true of saying that we should not support tax-funded institutions. The financial sector is basically tax-funded.
Of course.
You recall the IMF study of the leading American banks, which determined that virtually all their profits come from their implicit government insurance policy. cheap credit, access to higher credit ratings, incentives to take risky transactions which are profitable, but then if it's problematic, you guys pay for it. Or just take the basis of the contemporary economy, which actually I've been privileged to see developing in government subsidized laboratories for decades. MIT, where I've been since the 1950s, is one of the institutions where the government, the funnel in the early days was the Pentagon, was pouring in money to create the basis for the high-tech economy of the future and the profit-making of the institutions that are regarded as private enterprises. It was decades of work under public funding with a very anti-capitalist ideology. So according to capitalist principles, if someone invests in a risky enterprise over a long period and 30 years later it makes them profit, they're supposed to get part of the profit. But it doesn't work like that here. It was the taxpayer who invested for decades. The profit goes to Apple and Microsoft, not to the taxpayer.
Indeed. If you take an iPhone apart, every single technology in it was developed by some government grant.
And for
every single one.
And for long
and some
periods.
of them by government grants from other countries,
Yeah.
like Wi-Fi from the Australian
And
Commonwealth.
you see an interesting picture of it from a place like MIT or other major research institutions. So if you walked around the building where I work 50 years ago, you would have seen electronic firms, Raytheon, iTech, others, IBM, there to essentially rob the technology that's being developed at public expense and seeing if they can turn it into something applicable for profits. You walk around the institution today, you see different buildings. You see Novartis, Pfizer, big pharmaceutical corporations. Why? Because the cutting edge of the economy has shifted from electronics-based to biology-based. So therefore, the predators in the so-called private sector are there to see what they can pick up from the taxpayer-funded research in fundamental biological sciences. And that's called free enterprise and a free market system. So speak of hypocrisy, it's pretty hard to go beyond that.
Quite right. This hypocrisy is fundamental to the whole enterprise culture of capitalism from
the
250 years ago. I mean, the whole notion that there can be a market system which is at an arm's length separated from a state, which is the enemy, is the sickest joke in the history of humankind. If you think that, I mean, this narrative of private wealth creation, which is appropriated by the big bad wolf, the state, on behalf of trades unions and the working class that need a social welfare net, is just a preposterous reversal of the truth. That wealth is being created collectively and appropriated privately. But right from the beginning, I mean, the enclosures in Britain would never have happened without the king's army.
That's
and
true.
Without state brutality for pushing peasants off their ancestors' land and creating the commodification of labor, the commodification of land, which then gave rise to capitalism. Just half an hour ago, we were being shown, some of us, the magnificent collection of maps of the city of New York in this wonderful building. And you could see in one of the maps of Alabama the precise depiction of the theft of land from Native Americans, the way in which it was parceled up, commodified. Now, that would never have happened without the brutal intervention of the state, which created the process of privatization of land and therefore of commodification.
Actually, one of my favorite passages from Adam Smith is where he gives advice to the new colonies, to newly liberated colonies, as to how they should pursue sound economics, which is pretty much what the IMF tells the third world today. What he said is the advice was you should concentrate on what was later called comparative advantage, produce agricultural products, you're good at that, export furs, fish, and so on. But don't try to produce manufacturing goods, because Britain, England, has superior manufacturing goods. So therefore, you should import them from England. They're good at that. You're good at cotton and corn. Incidentally, the cotton was hardly by free enterprise. And you should certainly not try to monopolize the resources that you have. And if you pursue those practices, then everybody will be better off. Economic theory proves that. Well, the United States happened to be free of English control, so therefore they were able to do the opposite, just as England had done. High tariffs to block British goods enabled them to create a textile industry, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, later in the century a steel industry, blocking superior British steel, and right up to the present, as I've mentioned, with high tech. As far as monopolization is concerned, the U.S. made a major effort to monopolize the basic resource for the early Industrial Revolution, namely cotton. That's the oil of the 19th century. And the U.S. had most of it, not all of it. And the conquest of Mexico, which was not exactly by free enterprise, was largely undertaken to try to gain a monopoly of cotton, which would overcome the major enemy in those days, which was Britain. Britain was the big force, the enemy. And the Jacksonian presidents, Tyler, Peirce, mid-19th century, their position was that if we could monopolize cotton, we could bring England to our feet. That way we could really defeat them. They didn't quite make it, but made a lot. Incidentally, that effort was what Saddam Hussein was charged with in 1990. The charge was ludicrous, but the charge was he was going to try to monopolize oil and bring us all to his feet, which was crazy. But the U.S. did try to monopolize cotton, and that's part of the way in which power shifted from England to the United States. I think that's a pretty good record of the way sound economics has worked over the years. There have been places where sound economics was applied, liberal policies. It's called the third world. And it's not an accident. You take a look at the global south. One country developed, Japan, the one country that was not colonized. Take a look at East Asia, the tigers of East Asia. One exception, the one that was conquered by the United States, 1898, with a couple 100,000 people killed and stays semi-colonized, not part of the Asian tiger explosion of industrialization. The pattern is just uniform, but somehow hasn't entered economic theory. Wonder why. You're an economist.